Welcome to the Album Spotlight Show, the only show... Today we're going to be delving into the specifically not British electronic band LCD Soundsystem's second full-length album, Sound of Silver. Released in 2007, it stands as the band's most popular album, surpassing their self-titled album and their subsequent third and fourth albums as well. Now, I only discovered this album in 2019 after a recommendation from my brother because it's one of his favorite albums of all time. When I listened to it the first time, I honestly didn't like it at all. But then for some reason, I decided to listen to it again a few days later on my drive home from work, which at the time was like 45 minutes. So I had plenty of time to listen to the whole thing. And for whatever reason, this second listen, it just sounded incredible. It was so much better. Maybe I just had the right sound system. Whatever the reason, ever since then I've considered it to be one of my favorite albums of all time. I got my copy on vinyl just this past summer at my local record store, and I was really lucky because they rarely have electronic stuff, and this was their last copy of this, so I got pretty lucky in that sense. And with that, let's put this on the wall and talk about the album. Actually, before we do that, I just want to, for a minute, talk about how, when I listen to music, how I don't normally think about the meaning of the songs. Like, oh, this song is so deep and political, it stands for all his views on how he thinks about blah, 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 blah. No, I don't care about any of that crap. Like, I hardly ever pay attention to what a song is about. If it sounds good, it sounds good. I'll listen to it. When Gorillaz' album Humans came out in 2017, everyone was like, it's too political. I was like, I don't give a shit. It sounds good. I'm going to listen to it. I don't know. I don't care. Now, I'm not going to say that someone's like message is like stupid or anything. I just kind of don't care. In Sound of Silver, the songs do have a meaning. They're not like political or anything like that, but they do have they are about something, but that meaning is like all over the place. It's like different for every song in the album. Like all 9 tracks are very sonically and thematically different. Like they all change in style, and I almost said they all change in BPM. Oh yeah, all the songs are different speeds. Did you know that? It's wild. I mean, there are actually some albums where every song is the same BPM. C418's DF, every song in there is the same. I think it's 180, but I could be wrong. But anyway, let's move on to the first song of the album. So the first song of the album is Get Innocuous! Exclamation point. And since LCD Soundsystem are known for their really long songs with tremendous build-ups, it seems only fair that this album and this song be no different. Get Innocuous is easily one of my favorites off the album, like immediately, with its 2 or 3 minutes of just straight build up into the song that's like only 7 minutes long. It perfectly it has this grandiose entrance into the album. LCD Soundsystem songs in general tend to run long. On Sound of Silver alone, you've got 2 7-minute tracks, an 8-minute track, and an 8.5-minute track. What I really like and appreciate about LCD Soundsystem is that even though their songs are quite long, they never feel their length. Excluding genres like drone or ambient that are a lot easier to get away with repetition, you could have a really simple song that's quite repetitive and it would get pretty grating near the end of it. But with LCD Soundsystem, the complex melodies and drum patterns have so much going on in them that there's always something else to pay attention to in the mix. The second track, Time to Get Away, is not one of my favorites on the album. That one and Watch the Tapes, which just so happen to be the shortest tracks on the album, are probably my least favorite. Length is not usually a factor for me if a song is a favorite or not, but if a song is longer, it's like, ooh, I get more song. The drop in this song, though, is like awesome. For this part, they bring in Nancy Wang to do a bunch more lyrics. Is it Wang? Wang? I think it's Wang. Nancy Wang.
Wang.
Hope I'm not mispronouncing that, but for this part, they bring in her to do more vocal parts. Nancy Wang is a really great vocalist, by the way. She's in Get Innocuous as well, near the end, when she's going, you can't normalize, don't it make you feel alive, over and over again. I do like James Murphy singing a lot, but whenever Nancy comes on, I'm like, yes, sing more. Nancy as a singer isn't used too often, unfortunately. She's primarily on the keyboards, but there are a couple songs that are like almost entirely just her singing, and those are of course great. Freak Out / Starry Eyes being one of them. I recommend that track if you like Nancy Wang. She's primarily used as like extra pizzazz on top of James's vocals. He'll be saying some of the lyrics, and then every so often you'll just hear her say some of the same things as well, and it especially is good with the contrast of the male and the female vocals that you know, it's just an extra layer that helps. North American Scum is like the big single from this album. I'm sure everyone has heard it at this point. It's just such a fun track that is essentially entirely a joke. A lot of people thought they were British, and they were like, no, we're not. And then they decided to make an entire song about that. It's also about how heckin' cool and simultaneously really stupid North Americans are. And I can relate to this track a lot because I live in North America. I live right here. So you get this really fun and like funny track, and then the album like changes pace entirely, and it's a lot slower and more melodic. And you get this like really emotional song that I'm fairly certain is about James's wife having a miscarriage. Someone Great is a really smooth track. I can't remember the rest. Someone Great is a really smooth track. It's very bittersweet, and it's one of the more melodic tracks on the album. The instrumental of Someone Great actually comes off of their 46-minute long song called 4533, which actually isn't the length of the track. It's named after the two most common record spinning speeds, whatever you call that, I don't know, RPM. Now, I don't know if they made the instrumental for 4533 and then decided to use that section of the song and put vocals on it, or if they had the whole Someone Great song and then just took the vocals out of it and put it into 4533. I'm not sure, or if it was kind of simultaneously made for both. Who knows? Either way, I like it in both tracks. However, every time it comes on in 4533, I'm like waiting for the vocals to come in, and then they never do, and I'm like, no, where are they? 4533 is another awesome track by them. If you have the time, I highly recommend listening to it in full. I was actually very lucky to find a copy of this on vinyl when I went on a trip. There's this one random record store, and it was just there, and I was like, are you fucking kidding me? A sealed copy? So I had to cop that shit. But yeah, one song is so long that it stretches between two discs. It's on a ×2 LP for one song. But we can move on to the next track, All My Friends, which keeps that similar bittersweet feeling going. What I especially love about this track is how right at the beginning you can tell that piano is actually being played live by someone, because if you listen really carefully, you can hear them like kind of mess up. It's not really a mess up, it's just that you can tell that it's not like a MIDI playing it like perfectly on time. You can just tell immediately like this was actually played live by someone, which is another quality of LCD Soundsystem that's like amazing. They'll have these like really long songs with like piano parts or synth parts or drum parts that just loop for 8 continuous minutes. And they're all played completely live. They hardly ever use drum machines. So if you hear like a long song with a part playing over and over again, it's like someone's actually playing that. And I think that adds so much character to the song. It just adds such a like homemade quality to the music. I really love in this track how it builds in intensity as it goes on. At one point they add like just one note that plays, which helps to really fill out the mix. And it kind of like sets the level of intensity for the track, and everything else can be like based off of that note, if that makes sense. I don't know if that made sense, but I think you understand what I mean. Us v Them is not one of my absolute favorites. It's really good in terms of the song long build up, but there's just a couple tracks I would put above it. A great element of this song is, once again, there's just like one note being played, one chord or whatever, but it slowly changes in quality or tone because someone's like messing with the filters or whatever. This is another song that, while quite repetitive, benefits from the complexity of the loop. For such a long, huge, and tremendous song, you'd think it would have like some extravagant ending, but no, it just kind of stops. A detail that I touched on earlier is how personal their songs feel. Like the tiny little mistakes, or you can hear sometimes like them talking in the background of the studio or something, and I really like those little tiny things that are almost inconsequential, but I think if they weren't there, it would not be as good of a song or an album. There's actually a couple moments on this album and other albums of theirs where you can hear them talking before or after the song that they play. Like in their 2017 song, Tonight, at the end, you can hear James Murphy say something like, "That's gonna have to be good enough. I can't do this song anymore. Like, my brain hurts."
It's gonna have to be be good enough. I can't do this anymore. My brain won't work.
Like, obviously, they've been recording this song for hours. They finally get a good take, and he's like, yeah, fuck it, let's go. That's the one we're using. Let's just move on. So in the beginning of Us v Them, you can hear them, like, talking a little bit. It's kind of indistant. You can't really tell what they're saying, but they're talking, and then there's, like, one, like, odd bass note that plays, so I guess the guitarist was getting ready to play or whatever, but they just keep that in, and then, like, the song begins. It's just like on my other video, Egregious Postmortem Albums, where I talk about the Beatles' latest outputs, even though they're dead, and how the studio executives have been parading their corpses around saying, look guys, a new album with music you've never heard before. And it's just like outtakes and alternate cuts of songs where they like literally fuck up and you can hear them talking in the studio. But in LCD Soundsystem's case, it was actually intentional because the original still alive band members decided to keep those moments in the album. All of LCD Soundsystem's songs almost feel like they're unprofessional in a way. They sound like they were just made by a couple of friends jamming together in a garage, which adds that personal touch that I keep talking about. With that, let's move on to the next track, Watch the Tapes. This is probably my least favorite on the album, but I wouldn't put it at the bottom. I would just kind of put every track above it, if that makes a difference to you. Despite all that, this song does have one of my favorite bass lines on the whole album. When the synth or the bass guitar or whatever it is comes in, it's just like so funky. And then later they add on that secondary echoed part that just beefs up the whole bass line. Near the end of the song, it gets really sick with this awesome piano part that comes in that just plays the same note over and over again. But as I said before, it just helps to amp up the whole mix. Sound of Silver, second last song. And this song to me is clearly a jam. It sounds like they were just kind of messing around and this was the best take that they got. It doesn't sound like they were like, okay, then we're gonna go into the chorus and then we're gonna go over here to this other bit and then we're gonna go back to the chorus. No, because it's kind of all over the place and it just kind of keeps going and going and going. And the only lyrics in the song are just that one line that James says over and over again. Sound of Silver, talk to me, makes you want to feel like a teenager, blah, blah, blah. That whole just like paragraph that he says, it's just that over and over and over again. All the parts are fairly consistent in this song, but it plays around with like some parts being active while others aren't, and it kind of just like goes through all the different combinations of stuff playing and other stuff not playing. And near the end it turns into like a synth mosaic with all these tiny little poppy notes everywhere, and it's just like, my god, there's just so much going on right now. What am I listening to? This is a song that has a really nice outro. I usually prefer songs that have a nice like elongated, stretched out, smooth ending with a nice long fade out, and this is a song that does that. It has all those quick tippy poppy synth sounds playing as the song like degrades near the end, and then eventually you're left with just this one quiet violin sound, which I think is a real violin. So the violin is actually uncredited as far as I can tell, unless the sound we're hearing is actually a synthesizer. In that case, it was done by James Murphy, because apparently this entire song was made by James by himself, which I didn't realize until looking at it right now on Discogs. A small detail that I've noticed is that they hardly ever use classical instrumentation, except for the few endings of tracks on this album that are violin. There's a couple songs that use violin at the very ending, and only at the ending. The first song, Get Innocuous, has that weird, almost shrill violin part at the end. And then the song Sound of Silver itself, as well as the final track, has the violin motif, which we'll talk about later. But it's just interesting that the song opens with a track that ends with violin, and it ends with a song that ends with a violin as well. I don't know if there was some sort of a intention behind that or anything. I assume there wasn't really like it means this, but I don't know, it's just an interesting detail to note. On this album, it sounds like they were using the same drum kit for every song, and I'm really a fan of the kick drum that they use especially. To me, it's a quite unique sound, as it sounds quite stunted and muffled. Usually for upbeat music, you'd want like a massive, like beefy, bassy kick drum, but for this album, it's quite tame and like quick and muffled. Like it has no room for reverb because they likely stuffed it full of pillows. I bet the album would have sounded cool with a big bassy kick drum, but I do really enjoy the sound that they went with. It's not that punchy, and it helps to make the rest of the elements more even in the mix. This doesn't sound like the correct wording, but nothing on the album stands out. Like nothing shines way above and is way louder or more clear, and nothing's like way buried underneath everything else. Everything's like very even. Nothing is left in the background and nothing is like put out on top. It's not like, oh, for this song we're focusing on the kick drum, and then for this song we're focusing all on the guitar. No, it's like the final product for every song is the entire mix bundled together. None of the songs on this album have a transition between each other, except for the last two tracks, kind of. As I was listening to the album, I noticed, I was like, what the fuck? This is actually like noteworthy. That the static between the last two tracks is the same. I believe in an attempt to create the smoothest transition to the final track as possible. But I actually had to like stop the last track and like go back and listen to the transitions of all the other ones. I'm like, no, the static would be like. So the last track is called New York, I Love You, But You're Bringing Me Down. It's a very long and clunky title. However, it's a very great song. It is quite different from the rest. It's a lot more laid back and emotional, and it's mainly just piano for the entire first half with some vocals, but it holds up. It's a nice track and a perfect way to close the album. It also summarizes the feeling of the album quite well for me. Even though this whole album is quite upbeat and sounds like they're just having fun, there's a lot of undertones of bittersweetness in this entire album. To theorize a little bit, even though I said that I never think about what the albums are about, this one I couldn't help it. I kind of like had a eureka moment about the whole album as I was writing the script for this video. With this being their second album, I feel like that in and of itself is what the album is about. I mentioned before about how the recording almost sounds unprofessional, and I think that was exactly intentionally the sound they were going for. There's a stark difference between their first and second albums. It's the same sounds, but kind of wrapped up in a different way. The first one's like, yeah, we're just having fun, we're partying, woo! And then the second one kind of adds a lot more emotion to the songs. The whole sound could be bittersweet, like, hey, we're famous now and that's cool, but we kind of miss just being a small band doing whatever we want. That's what I get out of it, at least. I think a little bit more evidence to my theory is the album title itself. Like, it's the sound of silver. Like, albums, when they get insanely popular, they go gold, right, or platinum. So this is like before they were famous, which is silver, which is before gold, right? It's the sound of silver. It's the sound of a band that's not quite famous yet. So with that in mind, the final song being very emotional kind of summarizes the whole feeling of the album. Even though it's all upbeat and there's no consistent theme, I still hear those bittersweet undertones through the whole album. So anyway, back to the actual song itself. It's a very laid back track with just some piano and some very light drumming and then just some lyrics on it, until it finally drops like 3.5 minutes in. There you get some really intense drumming with lots of crash cymbals and some much more powerful guitar chords. This only lasts for like a minute though, and then it's just like a piano ballad until the end of the song with no words on it. The song is actually the least repetitive on the album, mainly because of the piano. It sounds like the piano was played live on top of the track. There was probably some ideas in mind, but it sounds like someone just played along to the track as it played, and because it rarely repeats and it's always like kind of shifting around and stuff. It's the only track where the piano does anything more than just like a simple loop over and over again. It was probably mostly predetermined, but the changes in the piano sound like someone just coming up with it on the fly. So yeah, that's pretty much the entire album. Well, no, it is. I talk about every song. That's the whole album right there for you. All in all, it's a really fantastic album in terms of personality and musical. All in all, it's a really fantastic album in terms of instrumentation and personality. It's very personal and quite unique, and I really don't think that this could be created or recreated by anyone else. Like, I feel like you need James Murphy at the helm to be able to create something like this, because it's just entirely James Murphy. Like, you can just tell when a song has James Murphy on it. It's like, sounds like James Murphy. Not to say that their other albums aren't good. They're great. But they definitely peaked at this album. All the other albums have a couple tracks that I like, they're not as good, or there are a couple tracks that I might actually like skip and don't like very much. But this one, absolutely all the way through, there's never a dull moment, and it's perfect, basically. Of course, I hope that they do, but I kind of feel like it would be difficult for them to top this album. And I don't mean that as a way to like, don't try. Please, James Murphy, keep making music. I know you said that you're kind of like not making music with the band anymore, but like, you're also kind of touring right now, so I don't know if you're back together or not, but please keep making music and try to make a better album than this, because it would still sound really great. I mean, we'll probably eventually get another album. They said they were done after This Is Happening, but then they made American Dream in 2017, so I don't know. Maybe we'll get another one. And so on that note, I think I said all I wanted to say about the album, so yeah, I guess I'll see you next time. By the way, I changed the format of the video. Is it any better? Is it still boring? I hope not. These pretzels are making me thirsty.